I'm going to hand over to Emma now to introduce our guest speaker.
Okay, so it's a great privilege and an honour this morning to welcome an expert on government procurement and somebody who actually spends probably as much of his working life thinking about small businesses like yours and mine as we do. So I want to welcome today the Crown Representative to Cabinet for Small Business, Martin Traynor. Welcome, Martin. Come in. It's lovely to have you here today. And I just want to say it's a very impressive sounding title that you have, the Crown Representative for SMEs to Cabinet. And I wondered if you could just kick off by explaining to us what that means and what your role is, what you actually do in that role, please. Thank you.
Emma, thank you for the introduction. I'm delighted to be joining you this morning. I think, as you pointed out, it's Small Business Crown Representative is a very grand title. One wouldn't describe it as an overly powerful position in the Cabinet Office, but one thing I've learnt over the years, it gets you a very good table in a restaurant. Now, my role in the Cabinet Office is twofold. First of all, to work with government departments to try and make our procurement procedures, policies and practices a lot easier for small businesses to be able to navigate. I'm also charged with working with the small business community to try and encourage more small businesses to enter our supply chain. Now, for a lot of small businesses, they regard doing business with central government, we're overly bureaucratic, we too hard to do business with, we don't pay on time, all those sorts of things. Well, actually, the last one, we do pay on time. We're probably one of the best payers now in the UK. But often with, as we know, with perceptions, they're 9/10 reality. So there is quite a lot of things to do with small businesses to actually convince them that actually doing business with government is something well worth doing. Have we got the slides available, Emma?
I do, yes. Here we go.
Well, we're going to jump off screen now and hand directly over to Martin, and yeah, we will see you for the Q&A.
Oh, I just need to.
Okay, there's the first one. If you could go to the next slide for me, please.
There we go. Sorry, I'm unable to remove myself from the screen, so I'm going to sit here as well.
Yeah, don't worry. Okay, well, today I'm going to talk to you about public procurement, but when we come to the Q&A session, if there are any business-related questions you want to ask me, feel free to do so. And if I can't answer it today, I will actually find an answer for you. Can you go back to the previous slide, if you don't mind? That's lovely. Just to put this into context, this is the government's manifesto commitment, and it's worth me reading it. We will support startups and small businesses via government procurement and commit to paying them on time. We will also clamp down on late payment more broadly and strengthen the powers of the Small Business Commissioner to support small businesses that are exploited by their larger partners. Now, that's a pretty clear manifesto commitment. And as a result of that, there are a lot of things that will come out of that I will go through with the various slides. But again, to put this into context, central government spends the best part of £60 billion a year on goods and services. So that is a significant expenditure in the economy. But also the government has an aspiration that for every £3 it spends, it wants £1 spent with an SME. So my role in life is to try and help deliver that particular objective. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the total public expenditure on goods and services, it's something in the region of 290 billion. It actually represents 14% of GDP. So there is a huge opportunity there for small businesses to pitch in for government contracts. Now, the reason I'm talking to a lot of small businesses about that, there are very few things that government in one form or another doesn't purchase. You know, sometimes you think about government procurement as in, you know, aircraft carriers, etc., etc. But in reality, there isn't much that we don't buy, you know, whether that's surfboards for Sport England, whether it's pork scratchings for the officers' mess at Cranwell, or there's huge amount of stuff we do. So there are lots and lots of opportunities for small businesses to think about pitching for government contracts. Okay, go to the next slide, please. Now, to aid us in this particular field and opening up what contracts we have available, the government created something called Contracts Finder, and the link is there in the slide. Now, what that basically means that any contracts from central government over the value of £10,000 has to be advertised on that site, and any public sector contracts, this is for councils, NHS, police, etc., over the value of 25,000 must also appear on the Contracts Finder site. There is a slightly different one for defence. The reason for that is obviously there are all sorts of security implications for pitching for defence contracts, you would imagine. So these are free portals. There you can register on the portal to get email alerts, which, for instance, you know, if you're in a particular sector and you fill in the various criteria, when a contract becomes available, then we will email you with the details, and you then got the opportunity to look at it. It's a totally free service, and if you haven't had a look at it, I would urge you to do so. Can we go to the next slide, please? One of the things that businesses have told us is that we need to start making our documents an awful lot simpler. And in fairness to a lot of small businesses, when we send you what's called a PQQ, which is a pre-qualification tender document, when that hits your desk, you know, it's 50 pages, and people often say, oh my God, have I got time to read this, let alone understand what it says? Well, what we're trying to do is to make this as simple as possible. We're trying to get it into plain English and look at it from an SME perspective. However, I do have to say to a lot of SMEs, you've got to remember, we are the custodians of the public pound. So therefore, we will inevitably ask more questions than you would see in a normal commercial PQQ. But having said that, there are opportunities for us to make that simpler and easier for SMEs to navigate. Just to give you an example of some of the stuff that I've done in supporting this particular agenda, and I go back to the example of insurance. When I first started, one of the questions in the PQQ was, do you have £10 million worth of insurance? Well, the government's policy objective is to do business with a company that had £10 million worth of insurance. What the objective was not was to force a whole raft of small businesses to take out £10 million worth of insurance on the basis that they might win a contract. So we just simply changed the wording to say, if you are the successful tenderer, will you insure to the value of £10 million? You tick the box yes, and you go through. So that actually very, very simple changing of the wording. We meet our policy objective in that we want to do business with someone that has adequate insurance cover. Now, admittedly, I don't get invited to the Insurance Institute dinner anymore, but c'est la vie. Right, next one, please. Now, prompt payment, and as many of you as SMEs will know how important that is. This has been a problem that's been around for very many years. You know, before I did this job, I ran a Chamber of Commerce, and the number of businesses that used to talk to me about, you know, not being paid on time was a huge issue. So interestingly, many governments have looked at this. Under the Blair government, legislation was taken forward to allow small businesses to be able to charge interest on late payment. Well, you know, the stark reality is if you're in a supply chain for a large company, and you start charging interest on late payment, you're not going to be in that supply chain too much longer. So it didn't actually work. And interestingly, some of the research I did when I started found that the only people that really used it were insolvency practitioners. And the reason they use it, they're just after the money and they're not interested in the relationship with anybody. So for them, it was effective. Now, what happened in France was that the French government actually legislated that small businesses had to be paid within 60 days. Now, that was quite an interesting, and we did look very closely at that. But what the French told us was all the people that were paying at sort of 25, 26 days suddenly started paying at 55, 56 days. So actually, that's the law of unintentional consequences. So what we decided to do was on the 1st of September 2019, the minister wrote to all of our strategic suppliers and said, if you do not pay your supply chain with, and basically it was 95% of all undisputed invoices within 60 days, you would not be eligible to bid for government contracts. Now that, as you can imagine, would put quite a shockwave in the large business community. But you know, when the economy's worth, or certainly was before COVID, 1.5 trillion, when you've got an organization the size of us buying 60 billion, you know, that puts ripples into the whole pond there. And actually what we've seen now is an increase in prompt payment by a lot of these companies, and that again I think helps the small business community. And actually we earlier this year we actually moved the whole goalpost forward by one, and what we've basically said now, for prompt payment code, any business that employs fewer than 50 people will be paid in 30 days. So we're very much on top of this. It's a key government objective, and we want to make sure that our businesses, and small businesses especially, are paid on time. So a huge government initiative on that. Next slide, please. What we've also done is set up what's called the Public Procurement Review Service. Now, this is a service that we provide if a business has tried to contract with the public sector and they feel that the process was unfair, or they felt they were badly treated, etc. So they have somewhere now that they can actually go to, and the Public Procurement Review Service will investigate. And I have to say, I think 95% of the cases that they have dealt with have resulted in either better practices or the procurement process actually being started again. So it has been hugely successful. But again, it gives businesses another avenue to be able to raise issues with us. And again, if we get issues raised with us, we've got the opportunity to change things. Can we go to the next slide, please? Right, just to make sure that this actually filters down into government, and I often say to people, you've got to recognise that the word government is not singular, it's plural, because often, you know, through the government departments is probably best described as a fiefdom. So they're all slightly different, they all have different ways of working. But to make sure this happens, there is a minister in every government department now who has been appointed to oversee the work for the department and ensure that there are robust action plans in place to support the SME agenda. And what we've also done to support the ministers in each department in their commercial teams, there is an SME champion. Again, this is a civil servant, but he or she is charged with ensuring that the momentum is kept up and the departments meet their targets. If we could go to the next slide. Now, clearly there is more work to do, and we recognise that. But to assist me in my role, we have what's called an SME panel, and this is a collection of 25 small businesses from up and down the UK that have joined us to help advise on procurement. Some of these businesses have done business with government, others haven't. But as the SME panel is there to overlook some of the things that we're doing, and just to make sure that we can then input into the ministerial teams the things that we need to do to be able to change the dial, as they say. If we could go to the next slide, I'd just like to talk a little bit about some of the priorities I have. Now, if you look at the first one there, tell us once. Now, interestingly, if you were to go and fill in a PQQ at the Department of Transport, and then you went on to do some business with the Department of Education, you would of course have to fill in their PQQ. Now, for the vast majority of PQQs, 80% of the questions we ask are generic, and only really 20% is actually what we're asking you to bid for. Now, when I first started, I came across a business that filled in 17 of these. There was a legend back at the office that someone had done it 56 times. Now, the amount of time businesses have to spend filling in all these PQQs time and time again, you know, copy, paste, all the rest of it. So what we're developing is a tell us once approach. So therefore, you can go into any one of the government departments, you fill in the PQQ, and the generic information is then held. So you go to another government department, you tap in your VAT number, or you tap in your company's house number, and the information in the generic part of the tender cascades down. Now, obviously, the small businesses and businesses in general are responsible for making sure that that information is up to date. But we reckon that could save a business up to 16 hours. Well, that actually for me is a win. Now, it will take us a little while to get there, because it probably won't come as a surprise to you. There are about 17 different IT systems across central government, and very few of them talk to each other. But we will get there, and there is something called Project Conclave that's driving towards that. Now, another key part of my priorities obviously is communication advice. So I'm very, very keen to come along to this events like this, just to talk to businesses, say, look, government's open for business. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I continually post updates on government services and advice. Now, interestingly, when we come to meet the buyer, this was something that concerned me when I first joined, in that the quality of meet the buyer events across central government was, should we say, inconsistent. Some departments did it particularly well. Other departments, it was the usual sort of thing. Some poor sod's PA was given the role. Can you set up a meet the buyer event? They'd never done it before. So they eventually get some hotel room booked somewhere, and the speakers booked and all the rest of it. And then the question was, well, who should we invite? And then somebody would give them a list of all the suppliers that the department has. Well, you're having a meet the buyer event with the people you're already doing business with. So that was something that we were looking to improve on. And I'd at the time done an agreement with the British Chambers of Commerce that they would host events for us and work with the other trade associations to make sure we got the right people in front of our buyers. Well, of course, in between then and now, we have the intervention of COVID-19, which of course has changed the way we do these types of things, because they're now all on online, via whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever. But interestingly, just before Christmas, I spoke at a Department for Transport meet the buyer event, and to my surprise, there were over 1,000 SMEs on the call. And it was a wonderful opportunity for the Department of Transport to talk to a wide variety of businesses about the sort of contracts that were coming up. Now, interesting, I spoke to a lot of these small businesses about this after the event, and a lot of them said, well, actually, this suited us quite well, because, you know, we've come along for a 2-hour session. We haven't had to spend an hour and a half traveling there and an hour and a half back. You know, we've been able to hear the presentation. We've been able to go into rooms. So for instance, you could move into one of the rooms where you would hear from rail, and the other one you go into road, etc. And through the technology that we've got now, it's actually a lot easier to do that type of thing. Well, if you think about a Meet the Buyer event for 1,000 people, well, not only the cost, but the logistics of trying to organize that. So actually, I see Meet the Buyer events, certainly from a central government point of view, being online. And I actually think that's a great development. The other thing that isn't on the slide here is that I'm working with government departments now to get them to publish what we describe as their pipeline. So what government departments will need to do now is to publish for the next couple of years what capital projects they have. So for instance, if the Department of Education is going to build 10 schools next year, it needs to say we will be building 10 schools in these locations and this is the time frame. We will also on the pipeline put up when contracts are going to expire. So that will give clear visibility of the sort of contracts that are likely to come up. And the reason that we're doing that is that often we'll do an invitation to tender and you've got 28 days to respond. Well, to be honest, you know, if you're running a large company and you've got a professional bid writing team, 28 days is not a problem. If it's a big issue, you'll throw a load of resource at it and you'll deal with it. If you're a small business, 28 days, by the time you've looked at the contract, evaluated whether you can bid for it, whether you need to bring in partners, 28 days is unreasonable. But so what we do, what the concept is that by publishing all the contracts that we've got coming up, it gives small businesses the opportunity to say, well, actually, I could see this contract coming up there. I might be able to do that. So they've got a time to do a little bit of research on it, see who's delivering it, how it's gone. And if they need to then maybe form some sort of collaboration with another company to pitch for it, they've got time to be able to do it, ready for when we issue the invitation to tender. So it's those types of activities that we're involved in. And only last week I managed to agree with the Department of Business more support for SMEs through the growth hubs. I'm not sure whether you've come across the growth hubs, but there are in England there are 38 local enterprise partnerships, and in each of those partnerships they have described what's described as a growth hub. Now the concept of the growth hub is very much a signposting service, but in relation to business support. But what we have realized as part of COVID, it has been very difficult to get business support out to particular sectors. And to be able to do that, we've had to use local government, we've had to use the banks, and it hasn't necessarily been as successful as we would have liked, but you know, we didn't have many other choices. Now, the Growth Hub is very much a signposting service. They're very much coming now into business support. Before 2010, of course, we had the Business Link Network, which was a county by county business link service, and there was probably the best part of 40 or 50 people in those organisations supporting businesses. Now, I don't think we'll ever go back to those heady days, but the government now is putting a lot more effort into supporting the growth hubs, and we've increased their funding. Last year we were funding them to the value of 30 million. This year we've increased it to 40 million. So I think the direction of travel is to get support through the growth hubs. Now, what I've asked each of the growth hubs to do is to have somebody on the team or access to someone that can give small businesses advice on public sector procurement. Now, and I do emphasize the word public sector procurement. There are loads of professional bid writers out there, and we're not looking to encroach on their particular business, but often for public sector contracts, the margins are often tight. And for a small business to have to go out and employ a professional bid writer, would eat into that profit, and often for a lot of small businesses not viable. But again, it's having somebody on the team there that could explain some of the questions that we ask. Now, I'll give you a classic example. Some years ago, when Leicester went down the route of a directly elected mayor, the mayor asked me to head a task force about opening up procurement for SMEs in Leicester, because he wanted to see more contracts awarded in Leicester. But the mayor there, of course, was of a particular persuasion. And one of the things in the PQQ he asked for was an equalities policy. So one of the questions was, do you have an equalities policy? If you ticked it yes, you went through. If you ticked it no, you didn't. Well, it wasn't very long before small businesses started ringing us up and saying, well, you know, actually, what's one of these? I've looked online, I've seen IBM's policy. Have I got to do all of that? Well, actually, when you explained it to them, the vast majority of these businesses were doing it anyway. What they didn't have was 2 sides of A4 saying, this is my equalities policy. So a very simple thing we did, we worked with the Federation of Small Business. We developed a template, and that allowed small businesses to top and tail it, add in anything else they were doing in addition, sign to say that they were doing it. And therefore, when the question comes up, have you got an equalities policy, you can tick the box and include it. And sometimes it's as simple as that. And the fact that, you know, if you haven't dealt with a public sector procurement before, those are the sort of things that often businesses find difficult to navigate. Next slide, please. Now, I thought I'd mention some of the stuff that we do. I describe as hot topics. Social value is something that the government is particularly interested in, and the sort of things you'd find within social value are, you know, possibly taking on NEETs. It might be apprenticeships programs, supporting the community. These are all the sort of things that local businesses like yourself do automatically. Now, to be able to drive this agenda forward, what the government's basically said, in any scoring of a PQQ, we will be looking for a score of 10% in relation to social value. Now, that is really trying to enhance what businesses do out there to support the local community. Now, interesting, we say a minimum of 10% scoring, but my colleagues at the Department for Justice made it 20%, and they did 10% on the basis of normal sort of social value, as in the apprentices, etc. But they also put in another 10% on employing ex-offenders, because one of the biggest problems the Ministry of Justice has is what they call the revolving door. Often for ex-offenders to try and get employment post custodial sentence can be very difficult. And there are companies that take them on, but we could do a lot more. Now, this is costing the UK taxpayer about 4.4 billion a year. So you can see the logic of the Ministry of Justice through its procurement exercises, trying to influence companies to take on ex-offenders. And to be perfectly honest with you, I was pleasantly surprised at the positive response we got from a lot of our strategic suppliers. So again, it's using government procurement as a way of trying to deal with a social issue. The other thing we're actually keen to do is to encourage more startups. And what we quite rightly recognised in central government is that if we're going to improve the way that we deliver public services, then we need more innovation. And therefore we need to bring more innovation into central government. Now, we quite clearly recognise, easier said than done, but there are an awful lot of startups out there that actually are doing some really clever stuff. We've got to try and work out a way of bringing those businesses in and trying to enhance what we're doing. So I'm quite enthusiastic about that, and I think there's lots of opportunities. We've not yet got it right 100%, But I do think, because, and the reason I say that is that inevitably, you know, when you pitch for a government contract, they'll probably say to you, have you got 3 years of statutory accounts? Well, as a startup, you won't. You know, have you delivered a similar contract? No, you haven't. But again, it's how we can bring some of those SMEs to help innovate. And I think there's a real positive agenda there. One thing I'm also going to mention that's not on the slide, and that is net zero. This is becoming a huge driver now in central government. The Prime Minister takes personal interest in this one. And as you know, we've got COP26 at the end of the year. Now, the Prime Minister's view is very, very clear. That, you know, we not only need to be doing things, we need to be seen to be doing things. So there is a big push within central government to try and instigate net zero. That will be across all the departments very, very shortly. So I think you'll see that we'll have our individual action plans. But what will happen, and it's probably post the Purdah period, is that the Minister is going to write to all of our strategic suppliers, and we will ask them, as part of any procurement exercise, to provide us with their net zero plan. Now, I think it's probably fair to say the shorthand version is that if you don't put a plan in, you're not going to get the contract. So, and ministers won't put it as bluntly as that, but that's the message. Now, we were encouraged the other day that over a third of the FTSE 100 companies already have action plans. So I think it's going to be an important policy driver going forward. But actually, for a lot of small businesses, they're doing a lot of this anyway. So I think it's a good way of tackling this particular thorny issue. Next slide, please. Okay, well, again, on this particular slide, I want to basically talk a little bit about rules reform. As you're probably aware, we dropped out of the transition period on the 31st of December last year. That means that the UK is no longer subject to the various EU rules, and probably more importantly, European treaty principles. Now, what that has effectively meant is the government before Christmas put out what we describe as a green paper, which effectively is a consultation document. But in that green paper, we're talking about lots of particular reforms here in the UK in relation to procurement. Now, the minister describes this as once in a generation opportunity to change procurement rules, or certainly public sector procurement rules in the UK. Now, of course, we will be following WTO rules, which in fairness to the European Union is where the procurement rules started. But unfortunately, I think over a period of time, they successfully gold-plated it. So we're going back to the basis of WTO. Now, what this will allow us to do is to simplify much of what we have been doing over the last sort of 10 to 15 years. And I'll give you a sort of a classic example that local government often talk to me about, is the fact that they'll develop something with an SME, everything's going swimmingly well, they're pleased, they're ready to launch it, and somebody from procurement knocks on the door and says, you do realise we've got to procure this. So they go out on a procurement, and suddenly, you know, somebody like IBM knocks on the door and says, oh, we've been doing this in northern France. Yes, we can do this for you, and we can do it an awful lot cheaper. And the poor old SME who spent all the time working with the council developing something then gets shut out. So the intention now through the rules reform is to be able to change that. Now, we have to do transparency, so there's no question about that, but there'll be lots more opportunities to work with public sector organisations for SMEs, to work with them to develop things without that fear then of at the end of the process suddenly a procurement wrecking it. Now, that I think is a move in the right direction. The other important thing is that we're starting to have very sensible conversations with businesses around PI and in intellectual property. Unfortunately, we've had a great tendency of developing something with an SME or even a large business, and then when we've got it developed and everything else, we then end up having an argument about intellectual property. And that is not the way to do it. So I always describe it as having grown-up conversations with businesses now, in the fact that we talk about intellectual property up front. Now, Her Majesty's government really does not want to own intellectual property of all these things, probably with the exception of one or two things within the defence sector. So what we're keen on, we're happy to put money in to invest, but what we don't want to do is end up paying twice. But you don't need to retain intellectual property to do that. You can do it by a very simple license. So it means that we can develop something for the company, and then we don't get charged a second time at the other end of it. So quite simple to do, but you know, that has been a major shift in thinking. The other thing worth mentioning is that we are changing what we describe as the definition of making an award. So for instance, if you talk about I can only remember, right, if you talk about awarding something, the criteria that procurement officers have to use is something called the most economic advantageous tender. Now what that effectively means is the best price. So therefore, the cheaper the tender, you really should be going for it. So actually what we're going to do, we're going to remove the word economically, and it will just be most advantageous tender. So that actually will give procurement officers the opportunity to award a contract on the basis of its fit as opposed to its price. And we think that is a way of, one, opening up to SMEs who might in some cases probably be a little bit more expensive, but actually it might be the fit that we are looking for. So again, it just gives you an example of the sort of things that we are looking to do. The other thing that I mentioned earlier on about dropping out of treaty principles now allows us to set contracts aside for small businesses, or actually on geographical area. So for instance, for central government, we can actually set aside contracts below 120,000 for SMEs. We can also say, well, actually, we'd like to see this contract awarded to a business in, say, the Northeast. So we can actually now do that. For the rest of the public sector, the threshold is anything under 180,000. And for capital projects, it's 4.5 million. Now, these are all within the rules of WTO. So it is something the government can do. And as you're probably aware, there's a lot of conversations now about levelling up, etc. And again, this is the sort of thing that will aid the government to be able to do this. Now, hot off the press, and I appreciate if you didn't tweet this out, but I've got the figures in front of me on how we're doing in our spend with central government. It is really embargoed till 2 o'clock when the minister will make the formal statement, but I'm pleased to report that government spend with SMEs, direct spend, has increased to 6.6 billion a year, which is up 177 billion on the previous year. And indirect spend, I should say, which is, you know, through the supply chain, has increased now to over 9 billion, which is a 1.2 billion increase year on year. So the trajectory is heading in the right direction, and we will most certainly, I think, within a few years, get to our target of £1 in 3. Now that's been quite a canter through where we are in central government and some of our objectives. Now, again, I'm very happy to take questions. You can ask me questions about wider business support, and if I can answer them, I will do most certainly. So back to you, Emma.
Thank you, Martin. That's been a fantastic, as you say, a canter through. I'm just going to take my video back on and back in the room and stop sharing the screen. Yes, thank you very much. Martin, could you just repeat those last figures? The direct spend with SMEs, is up by how much?
Right, that's now 6.6 billion, and that's up 177 million. And the
that year on year or quarter on quarter?
Year on year, yes.
Year on year, lovely. Thank you. I won't release that before 2 o'clock, but I might use it for my column this week.
Yeah, your column's fine, but it don't really, because otherwise I should be found hanging under the Blackfriars Bridge.
So we'd love to have a scoop, don't we, on a Friday morning at the Biz Hub. So it's great to hear those numbers before anybody else. And what a great achievement, Martin, as well, because you've just been in the job 2 years, haven't you?
Yeah, it's the old sort of thing. When I joined, you're never quite sure because it's government is a big machine, etc., etc. But as I went round all the commercial directors in each department, the conversation was not, should we do business with SMEs? It was, how can we do business with SMEs? So I think the philosophical argument has been won. But again, the important thing is to filter it down through the organisation. And it is very much about how can we do this? Now, you've got to remember in central government, we've got 4,500 procurement officers. That's a big outfit. But when you're buying 60 billion quid's worth of kit, then probably doesn't surprise you.
So do you think do you think the increase was due to the changes that you've been making?
There's this great adage, isn't it? Success is a family and failure is an orphan. And of course, as you could imagine, yes, we all do our bit. I'm not going to say it's single-handed, because without the commitment of the government and the government's manifesto commitment, it wouldn't happen. But I think there is a recognition. And as I often remind ministers, there are about 5.5 million businesses here in the UK. And if you actually look at the number, because when we talk about an SME, it's under 250, that accounts for 99% of businesses.
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot in the Biz Hub, because obviously most people in the room are small businesses, micro businesses even, but I think, yes, at least 92% I think are less than 10 or less than 50 employees as well. So yes, so business and the private sector is made up of people like us in the main. So
yeah.
And to have a voice through you directly to Cabinet is really, really important and exciting. Yeah, and I'm so impressed to hear your progress.
Yeah, and and I have to say, I'm very fortunate in that I sit above the top of it, but I never have a problem getting an appointment with the minister or anything to discuss anything. But but quite clearly, right across the outfit, there is a determination to do this. Yeah, so that's so encouraging, I think, for us, and I've been really encouraged. I think partly perhaps the coronavirus pandemic has been in a way has enabled this, but I feel like we're so much, as small businesses, I feel so much more close to government than I have done previously. And the fact that I can message you on LinkedIn, you get straight back to me, you respond to my emails, it's really nice to bridge that gap a little bit between public and private. And I think everybody in the room feels the same about that.
I think yeah, there is the element as well as having Zoom calls like we're having now. It's kind of given sort of access a little. It's made it a little easier, I think. And a few years ago we probably wouldn't have thought of doing it like this, but now that we do, everybody's a little bit more accessible, and I think that's taught us something, and we've learned from that. I think that's right, but it also applies to the ministerial teams, because, as you know, moving a minister to go to various places, everything else is a huge exercise, has to be planned and all the rest of it. And the minister might get to 2 or 3 places in a day. What you'll find now is that ministers will set a day aside and they might do 7 or 8 of these. So you're actually getting, far more access than we've ever had before. And I actually think in informing public policy, that's a positive.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And it's interesting that you were saying about the Meet the Buyer events as well. They've worked so well online that you're actually just going to continue that. And I think we feel a bit the same about our Biz Hub meetings, that at first it was so difficult to kind of engineer the same kind of event that we had in the room, but we've become very good at it over the last year, and we will continue to do events like this. We're going to go in the room as well, but we're not going to lose this kind of digital package that we've perfected over the year. We're going to continue rolling these out as well for the same reason, because it just brings down those barriers and kind of reduces that hierarchy, so everybody is more accessible, which I think it can only be good for government policy and for business. So are we ready to
Let's get everybody into the room. So yeah, Gareth is going to upgrade everybody so we can start seeing people and get everybody into the room.
You're all ready, you've got your lipstick on, you brushed your hair.
Oh, good.
Quickly pop that jacket on over the pajamas.
Good morning.
Put your cameras on if you can, so that we can see you all. So much nicer to see everybody's faces. Hi Lee. Hi David. Hi Dane.
Hi,
Lovely
morning.
to see you all. Where is everybody?
There's not just one button that you can push over, so we've got to do it manually. Anyway.
Oh, I see. So bringing everybody in one by one.
Everybody comes in one
Hello,
by
everybody.
one.
Hi, Noam.
Hi.
How are you all? Hi, Keith.
Morning.
Morning.
Hi,
morning.
Morning.
Morning, Liz. Lovely to see you. Hi, John.
Let's have a look. There we go.
There you go, Martin. Here are the faces that you've been missing for the last 45 minutes. It's difficult, isn't it, to talk to an empty screen? It's very hard. All of us who've given presentations will appreciate how difficult it is to speak for that long with no kind of encouragement from the room, just your own computer screen for company. So thank you very much for delivering that so well. And yeah, welcome to the room, everybody.
I think that's everybody. Hi, Marika. Nice to see you.
Marika, can you put your camera on? It'd be lovely to see you again. I haven't seen you for ages. So,
right.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the Q&A session. If anybody's got any questions that they would like to direct, if you just raise your hand and we can just sort of work around the room. Yes, Lee, you're up first. Good morning.
And the mute off. Hi Martin, it's a great presentation and thank you very much. As a company, we're very keen to try and work with the local authorities as well as the national authorities. I have already started a process, joined up, so I think it's called Procreate or something, where you put some details in, they keep sending you stuff, although most of it was pretty not in our sector whatsoever. But the two questions I actually have for you is, you mentioned that the contracts are on a website and they have to be on there if they're over £10,000.
Yeah.
What about the ones that are less than £10,000? Are they? How do you get hold of those ones? Because that's quite a nice market for us, that sort of area, up to the 10,000 mark. And secondly, how do you join the meet the buyers, whatever sort of meeting it might be? I'd be very keen to get involved in that, to chat to people. I do have a doubt though, because we've looked into the process of procuring for government, and it does seem a nightmare to fill forms in and answer questions which I think a lot of time don't seem relevant to the business, our business, but maybe relevant to what you need. And as a small business, we don't really have someone dedicated to it. And chatting to a couple of people within a similar trade, we're in the design and print trade, that he said most big companies have a dedicated person and they nearly always win it because they've got the time to solve it and go back and forward. And he said, you can put a lot of time at it and you probably won't get anywhere. All right, that's a pity, because I'd love to work with the local authorities, because I have a strong belief in keeping things local.
Okay. Well, there's 3 points there. Contracts Finder, I would certainly recommend that you register on there. It's a free service. And again, you can choose the categories of things that you'll be interested in, and you'll get the email alerts. Now, in relation to contracts under the value of £10,000, well, as you would imagine, from a central government point of view, we don't do that many. The contracts tend to be larger. Now, what you'll probably find in your area is that the local authorities and other public sector groups will have come together. Now, here where I am in Leicestershire, they've got something that's called Source Leicestershire. And that's where the local authorities, the universities, and I think the NHS Trust here, put all their contracting opportunities. So I suspect in your area, you will probably have that. Where I would send you, Lee, to find out the information is talk to your local enterprise partnership and talk to the Growth Hub and ask them about this, and they should be able to point you in the right direction of what the website is, because undoubtedly inevitably there will be one, because all local authorities want to make sure that they're offering out to local businesses, because that's a driver for a lot of local authorities. Meet the buyer, again, similarly, it's the sort of the thing that you can look on Contracts Finder, and government departments say when they're doing meet the buyer events. But again, you're going to be fairly niche in what you're looking for, so it's an opportunity then maybe to set the criteria of the sort of meet the buyer events. Because no disrespect, I don't think a Department for Transport meet the buyer event would be for you. But having said that, if something in the Department of Culture, Media and Sport is doing something that it wants to do across the country, you may very well be interested. So again, I think that's the approach. The thing about picking contracts, I think, is a good one, and this is why through publishing the pipeline, that we will be able to give small business like you the opportunity to look at things, because often we'll get people that will bid into us and in the nicest possible way would never have a million years chance of winning. But again, they've looked at it, they've done it in a hurry because there's only 4 weeks, they spent a lot of time and effort, and and it's an awful lot of waste of time for those businesses. So by publishing the pipeline, it gives people the opportunity to take a longer look at it. Now, I recognise 100% what you're saying about larger businesses, and I think it was the Coal Authority that summed it up for me. They say, well, our reclamation work goes to 2 large companies. He says the reality actually is that we've worked with these companies for 30 years. They know what we want. They've both got professional bid writers. And so therefore, when we offer up a contract, it comes in and it's Rolls Royce. The small business that's probably close to the site that we will want to reclaim, the reality actually, we probably prefer to give it to them, but the bid comes in, it's poorly written, etc., and they don't get it. But of course, when you're in a procurement exercise, you can't actually, as a procurement officer, then talk to that business and say, well, if you put this in and put that in, you've got a chance. That's why I've been doing the work now with the growth hubs to try and increase the capacity they have to small businesses. So therefore, a procurement officer could then say, well, look, maybe if you went and talked to your local enterprise, your local growth hub, they might be able to help you with that bid. And often the mistakes that SMEs make are small ones, but again, it's and unfortunately the way procurement works, a lot of it is a tick box. So if it's a yes or a no and you tick the wrong one, then you do get filed. But again, if somebody's there and being able to help and of course what we do within growth hubs is publicly funded business support, then that could help small businesses like yourself. So it's a rather long answer.
Sorry, can I just clarify on that we can now go to our growth champions at the Growth Hub, for example, and say, we are thinking of bidding on this government contract we've identified. Can we please have some help and advice in producing this bid? And they will help us. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm basically saying, they're not going to be doing a bid writing service, but what they will do, they will be able to maybe answer the question on, say, equalities policy. If not, they will be able to point you to where the answer is. That's the intention.
Like a signposting service. So that, and is there any particular person we should ask for, a particular title?
No, not really. No, it's we're early days, but you will actually find, and it is worth looking on the local enterprise website, because they do facilitate meet the buyer events. It's a mixed patch across the country at the moment. Some are heavily involved in it, some of them aren't, but eventually we were trying to get everybody up to the same level.
So are you saying that the growth hubs effectively do a procurement training service?
No, we're not there on procurement training yet. It's more of a signposting. So for instance, if you've read through a PQQ, you don't understand it, what they're asking for here, then they will be able to point you in the direction of someone that could answer that for you.
Thank you. So I think, Keith, should we go to you and then the Rylands?
Yes, thanks, Emma, and thanks, Martin. Great presentation. As someone who's done, as you might guess from the sign behind me, but someone who's done a number of government procurement attempts, some successful, some not. I think I'd say that the most frustrating thing from my perspective with doing them is putting in the same information more than once, and you mentioned that, you know, you think, how many times do I need to find my VAT number and put it in?
Yep.
But I think the other thing is trying to get feedback after a bid, because you know, I mean, I'll give you a recent example. It was actually from Leicester City Council. I put in a bid. Okay, I didn't win the bid. I have no issue with that. But I rang the procurement person and said, you know, you've said in the letter you've sent to me, out of 17 criteria, you only met 15 of them. And I said, which 2 didn't I meet? I can't tell you that. And I'm like, well, you know, that doesn't help me. If I knew which 2 I didn't meet, then certainly, yeah, okay, nothing to do with that bid, because that bid's done and dusted. But the next one, if I came across those questions, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I know I need to write a better answer to that, because I didn't get it.
Well, Keith, I go back to them because they have a requirement in law to provide feedback. So telling you that they can't tell you is wrong.
Right, okay.
And if they don't, then I'm very happy for you to write to me and I'll write to them.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate that.
Like getting your job done. Excellent. John and Fiona, you are next. You have your hands up.
Just a very quick question. 11 years ago plus, we used to deal with an organisation called Firebuy, which was the government department set up to do procurement on behalf of the various fire and rescue services up and down the country. So rather than dealing with 60 odd different organisations, you could deal with one. And it was important to us because we were trying to develop a machine, a firefighting robot, and that was probably out of remit of most fire and rescue services. Now, Firebuy got shut in 2010. Is there anything replacing it, or is there another department that covers what they used to do?
John, I'll be perfectly honest with you, I don't know the answer to that. I know within the police force, they've set up a group, and mainly for the purchase actually of helicopters, because it's not very often that one police force can afford, you know, a helicopter, but a couple of them together can. So, but I'm not aware in fire and rescue. I would imagine their procurement probably still sits within local authority remit. I don't know the answer, but I can try and find out for you, John.
That'd be wonderful, very helpful, thank you.
Can I just ask a quick question, Martin? When you go through the PQQs and you're successful, do you then run a preferred supplier list, and so for repeat business? How does that work?
Well, I think every procurement is taken on its merit. So you know, we do have what's described as frameworks, where you can apply to come on to a framework, but I often say to businesses, you know, registering yourself on a framework doesn't automatically guarantee your business. You know, you've still got to, you know, press the flesh and all the rest of it. So, but getting yourself on a framework just makes it easier for you to do business with government.
Right. And you can only go onto a framework once you've been successful in a particular bid.
No.
No. Oh,
No.
okay.
You could. If we did that, we'd never get innovation in.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, thank you. I think David had a question. Did you, David?
Thank you. Yes, it's not a question as such, but just an observation, Martin. I mentioned before you joined us that fortunately this week I won my first government contract.
Excellent.
We clean officers, and I've won an NHS contract, so I'm really pleased with the service. The point I wanted to make is I first used contracts finder about 5 years ago, and I found it really difficult.
It's clunky.
Very much so. In this current process, it was much easier, much better. I made mistakes during my application, and the procurement lead was really helpful in guiding me along the process. So he went out of his way to help me. So the point I'm trying to make to the audience is people are genuinely trying to encourage us to do the right things. The other point I wanted to make is, I think you've got your priorities absolutely right, Martin. When this was to clean a few offices, that's all it was. But the tender was a 50,000 word document.
Yep.
And although there was 28 days to get the tender in place, I only had 5 days before I had to go and view the premises. So within 5 days, I had to block everything else out of my diary to sit and get my nose to the grindstone and read 50,000 words.
Yeah.
And that's why I made the mistakes during the application process and so on. So again, the point is, on your, I think it was your very second slide, you are trying to make life easier. That for me would be the number one issue. So you're making it easier to find the one contract to find in the first place, and then easier to apply, and then to take Keith's point, the follow-up afterwards. That is exactly the sort of thing I was hoping to hear from you today. So it's really positive. So thank you for that.
Oh, good. Thank you, David.
Numbers are really, really good, aren't they? I was pleased to hear about the increase. Is it in any particular sector that's responsible for that increase, Martin, or is it across?
Well, interestingly enough, it's actually Ministry of Defence, and because their spend is huge. It's probably something in the region of 25 billion, and they're probably the one department that's held us back, because a lot of the contracts they have are long-term, etc. So before we can get the SME bit into it, we've got to wait for some of these contracts to expire. But actually, I'm pleased to say they accounted for £1 billion with SMEs. So we were pleased with that. And again, it's always the challenge with the MOD, because as they often say to us, we're not going to be buying an aircraft carrier off an SME. But interestingly, in their supply chain, they were one of the big suppliers will be Rolls-Royce. Well, they're not an SME, but in those engines that they supply, there will be a raft of SMEs providing various widgets that go into those engines. So again, it's understanding whether that's what we count as the indirects. But interestingly, there's a business I came across, employs 28 people, and they make all the crests for the front of the ships.
Wow, that is interesting.
It's a small business. The crests for the front of all the
ships, because they've got a ship, they have a crest on the front, and this company makes them.
Wow, it's really encouraging to hear how the payment system has now changed, to be paid within 30 days. I think that's really encouraging for SMEs.
Yes, but it's taking a little while. But again, if we go back to pre-2008, when we had the recession, companies were encouraged to hold on to cash, because in those days you could empty the company's bank account. You could place it on overnight spot interest in Singapore, Hong Kong, whatever. You could get up to 1% on your money overnight. So all large companies had treasury departments that did that on a bit. So you hung on to the cash for as long as you possibly could. Well, if you can get 1% a year, you're doing well at the moment. So there is no need to do all of that. So, but I think it does take a while to work through the system. I think, in fairness, I think COVID has slowed things down, because companies are very conscious about the cash position. But largely from what we've seen of our strategic suppliers, they're meeting that target. But I still hear of companies that are paying at 120 days. And unfortunately, central government doesn't buy anything off them, so we're not in a position to influence them. But what we have done is that we make all companies over 250 people publish their payment profile on the government's BEIS website. So they have to do that twice a year. So they have to actually say what they're paying. So if anything else, we'll shame them into it.
Transparency, I think it's really key. Yeah, definitely.
But it is incredible, some of the anomalies that you come across, because in the aviation sector, paying within 365 days is the norm. It's incredible. But there's all sorts of weird and wonderfuls out there.
Lee, you've got another question? I'll come to you.
Yeah, just have another quick question for Martin, if I may. Obviously, I can understand each ministry needing their own unique procurement for certain things. But there are some items that perhaps could be sold to every single one of them individually. I mean, for instance, I don't unfortunately make aircraft carriers, but we do print, which could be done for any of them. So is there not a centralised one that covers can cover all of those items rather than having to bid on every single one individually?
Yeah, so that would be a dream, but as you can imagine, where we have 4,500 procurement officers, you can imagine the type of activity that goes on within the various government agencies. So I'm not sure we will get to that position. I think one of the things we're looking at very closely now is the NHS and how they procure, because again, I think this is an example where during the pandemic, you know, we had central government out there trying to buy PPE goods. We had NHS trusts out there also trying to bid for the same stuff. So the only thing it did was push the price up. So I think we're having a look at whether we can be more efficient in that way. And I've heard it talked about some sort of grand catalogue. So for instance, you know, that you can be approved, you can agree a price and it comes onto some sort of electronic catalogue. So therefore, if the NHS trust in, say, Newcastle wants to pitch for some work, they can then go on to the onto that particular website and then or catalogue and select it. But the big advantage, I think, for a lot of small businesses is this net zero agenda. Because you know, we were talking the other day about food miles. You know, how many food miles are involved in shifting stuff around? Can we do better in buying local? But it also will apply now for goods and services manufactured, because you know, if we're going to get to the net zero that we're talking about, we will have to cut down those miles. But I think for a lot of small businesses that are supplying into the local area, that puts you in a good position.
Absolutely.
On the, sorry, can I just say on the net zero, what can you sort of guide us through what sort of what a net zero plan, action plan would need to cover, like briefly?
It's a very hot topic this week, because that's one of the things that I've asked central government to do, is to come up with either an example of what a good plan looks like, or even a template, just to give small businesses the opportunity. Because if you tapped in and you saw the IBM one, you'd fall over. It's huge, but it doesn't need to be. So that's what I've tasked colleagues to do. The intention will be then to release it out to the various trade bodies. No reason at all you couldn't have one to put on the website, and then you can look at it. Now, each business is different. They'll adapt to what they can and what they can't do, but it's good to be able to look at something and say, well, actually, for small business, this is a good one.
So to follow up, yeah, I was going to say, to follow up on that, how do we know when that is, how do we tap into that? How do we know? Or do we just ring you, Martin?
Well, as I said, as always, somebody said, well, we haven't got the budget to do that, so I always got the basis, find one. So, but we are aiming to do that. But again, what I want to get to is get someone that'll do it, that it's simplistic. Because if I let the technical people get hold of it, we'll have about 100 pages on what carbon emissions are and the health. And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for, actually, if you've got an action plan, and to be honest with you, it probably only needs to be about 2 or 3 pages. You know, it's not, you know, Encyclopedia Britannica, but if the technical people get hold of it, it will be.
Now, David, did you produce one for your tender submission?
Not a net zero, however, there was a section on social values, social welfare, and the level of scoring surprised me, actually, as to how high it was.
Yeah.
And one of the things,
the amount of value they place on it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a scoring matrix, and the thing that played in our favour was all of our vehicles are electric from next month, and that, I think that's the tipping point as to why we won the contract.
Yeah,
really, that's so interesting.
And I think there's, I was talking about the rules reform and where we move away from the most economically advantageous to most advantageous, it then gives procurement officers far more flexibility in what they procure, where they procure from, etc. So actually, you know, but the lowest tender doesn't now be the automatic default.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. And finally.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But you know, it's taken a while, but we're getting there.
It does make it a reality, doesn't it? Like the net zero. If this, it's nice to see it actually coming down through government into now this kind of nuts and bolts of actually getting customers. You know, this has to be done. So, and obviously small business, given there's 5.5 million of us, have a huge role to play in bringing those carbon targets down. So,
absolutely,
good to know that we're going to get some guidance sooner rather than later. Okay, I had a question just to move off procurement, if I may, slightly, about the high streets. I know, for example, Keith runs a weekly chat on the rebuilding the high street, and we're very interested in this because we're just opening a pop-up shop in the new town centre in the town that we are all from, Whitehall and Borden. And I was saying this morning that Emma Jones of Enterprise Nation, who I'm sure you have come across before, is opening up a very similar shop on Oxford Street. Hello World. So are you aware of that project? And what my question is Cabinet planning to help small businesses returning to the high street or indeed arriving in the high street with any kind of rates reform? Is this a topic?
Right, there's quite a bit to unpack there. I'm not fully au fait on Emma's project. In relation to rates reform, I think the government and the Chancellor have certainly come to the conclusion that the current rating system is not sustainable in the long term. Now, I think we've known that for a while. The high street was under pressure long before COVID, but I think what COVID has done is accelerated that. So the Chancellor was due to announce rates reform as part of the budget this year, but what he has done is delayed it until I think it's either September or October, and then he will announce what the rates reform is likely to be. I think it's very, very clear that, you know, the rates that are being charged on the high street are not sustainable. And it was interesting to see a couple of weeks ago that Hammerson's, who own the vast majority of shopping centres, have reduced their rents by a third. So I think there's a realism out there that, you know, the high street will change. But I'll be perfectly honest with you. I went to a conference 25 years ago, and it was called The End of the High Street. And it was all about, you know, the Grattan and the Argos catalogues, and it was going to shut down everything else. Strange enough, they've all gone, but the high street's still there, but it will be different. And I think it comes back to what do we use city centres for and town centres for? And I think you're probably going to see a far more mixed economy, as in you will probably see a mixture of offices, a mixture of retail and living accommodation. Interesting, the City of London Corporation has committed to bringing in, I think it's about another 30,000 residents. Because actually, if you look at the City of London now, there's only 15,000 people actually live within the square mile, because it's all offices. So they've committed now that some of those commercial office space won't ever be back as commercial office space, but there's an opportunity to turn it to living accommodation. So I think there's an element of that going on as well. If you talk to the British Retail Consortium, they talk about the revival of town centres, not city centres, town centres. And they're making the point that if people are now going to work from home, then they're far more likely to shop local. So whereas you might have picked stuff up when you were working in the city, and you're now working at home, you may very well start shopping locally again. So they're convinced that it will be the revival of town centres. Sorry, long answer, but there's a lot of work in that activity. You're probably obviously aware that there are various grant schemes that have come in to try and help retail. You know, that people can apply for, rates, rebates, etc., etc. So there's been quite a lot of activity, but I'm not sure what we'll do next is the answer to that.
Liz, did you want to say anything on the high street? I know you have a shop on the high street. Have you got any questions on this revival of the high street for Martin?
Not so much, but I mean, I agree with what you said, and that's what we see. I'm a small rural town, and very much there's local campaign support to support local, so they very much get the local businesses involved in the campaign, and that sort of reaches out to the broader rural areas, and it's been quite successful actually. So we don't see empty shops actually in a small rural town. It's thriving actually, which is really good.
From Midhurst, isn't it? It's Midhurst, the town you're talking about.
It's sort of, it's very up and down. So at the moment I mean, last week was quiet, this week is busy. So it's,
well, let's
good, it's how retail is in general. So but yeah, but there's a good buzz about it, so put it that way. So which is very optimistic, put it that way.
Yeah, no, and I think that's right. But again, I think it's opportunities where you've got the choice of setting up a business improvement district. I've seen this in a lot of town centres, and it normally means a 2 or 3% levy on the business rate, and actually it's been quite effective. The one here, the nearest town to me is Loughborough, and it's, I think they're into their 10th year now. They've done some fantastic stuff.
I just wanted to ask Keith, have you got any insights from the group that you run, because you do run a weekly group, don't you, all about the high street? Have you got any insights that you can share with the group?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Lou. Yeah, I run a weekly group on Clubhouse, Martin, called Rebuild the High Street, and we get a very varied audience and a very varied number of people. But we've had, for instance, we've had Estimate Ray a few times on the show. But yeah, I mean, the general feedback is that people are seeing a quicker revival than I think everybody expected from this now. And I think part of that is because people who have been at home have generally saved money because they haven't been commuting to work or going on holiday or whatever, and so they have money to spend. And actually, just going to your local coffee shop for a coffee now has a novelty value which it didn't have 18 months ago.
Yeah.
But what is clear is that there is a great move to great recognition, really, that the high street needs to become a destination rather than just somewhere to shop. And so, we're seeing more and more high streets talking about bringing in live entertainment on a Saturday, for example, to actually draw the people in. Or we're looking at examples like, and I mean, Whitehill Borden would be a good example here, of like the drive-in cinema and those sort of things, where we're having ideas of how to make people go into the town centre or a city centre for more than just shopping. But also, I think it's fair to say, we're getting a growing movement amongst the people in the room there who come along to, in this sort of 15-minute walk idea of that if you've got the things you need within 15 minutes walk of your home, then you won't actually get in the car to go there, you'll walk. And that has a real benefit in terms of, again, net zero, which is where we're all looking to get. And one of the ideas we've had there, which is actually something which I was responsible for when I should add here, but when I'm also district councillor. But one of the things I was responsible for when I came on district council was that I came on firstly for a rural ward, which was Gresham, Hawkley, and the surrounding area. And what they all cried out for was a post office, because there wasn't a post office in any of the 3 settlements. And what I did was I went to the post office and basically said, what can we do to get around this? If we work together, how do we get a post office there? And we came up with a concept, which wasn't a novel concept, but it was novel for this part of the world, of a mobile post office. So now we have a van that goes around on a Tuesday and a Thursday to all 3 of those settlements, spends an hour and a half in each place, and actually is now providing the post office. And that's proving to be really successful. But it requires, though, a bit of out-of-the-box thinking initially, I think, and B, having a local authority that's prepared to put in some funding to make it start. Because the post office is saying, a van like that's going to cost us £40,000. We're not going to spend £40,000. Well, how about we give you £20,000, and suddenly it becomes a viable thing to actually happen. But I think, again, I think one of the things, I'm going to take a local authority perspective here for a minute, but because it's one of the things I find frustrating sometimes, what there doesn't seem to be, and I think this is true right across central and local government, is there's nowhere that you can, if you've got an idea like that, there's nowhere you can go to see existing best practice or where that's already happening, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so you feel like you feel like you're breaking new ground, and I do just worry about how much time and money is being spent reinventing the wheel in different places where somebody else has already done it, but no one knows because there's nowhere to put that information.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point there, Keith, and I can tell you from personal experience, I spend half my time telling the other one half of government what the other half's doing. We're not very good even as a government of sharing best practice, but interestingly, and again, I'm thinking of it in the rural context. There's is it the rural community councils? There's a raft of them in place, and I just wonder whether they collate the information under, I think their national organisation is called ACRE. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'll do a bit of investigation into that, Martin. Thank you. That's perfect.
Good.
It is interesting what we say though about the town centres need to, you know, it's what Borden is really looking at, a place to go to actually not just to shop, but to experience something and to go for something. And the shed that is the first unit that we're opening in the town centre has got an entertainment space in it. So well,
it's interesting because here in Leicester we have Foss Park Shopping Centre, which is close to the M1, M69, etc. It is the second most successful out-of-town shopping centre in Europe. The volume there is incredible. But when we were refurbishing the city centre of Leicester, you know, how do you compete against that? And it was interesting when I was talking to Hammerson's, they were saying, well, look, if you've got to look at the very concept of shopping. Because if you go to an out-of-town centre like Foss Park, it's what we describe as a clinical shop. You go, you know what you want, you buy it, you put it in the car and you drive away. A city centre has to be a destination, as I think colleagues were talking about earlier on. And when Hammerson's opened their new shopping centre, there was no coincidence that there were 14 restaurants in the facility, a cinema, because it was on the basis that this is a retail destination and the dwell time is longer. So the concept is people come, they do a bit of shopping, they might have a bit of lunch, they might do a bit more shopping, then they might go and see a film. You know, so it's a very different way of approaching it. But I think coming back down now to town centres, I think that whole way that we look at town centre, making it into a destination, an experience, is the way forward.
Definitely.
I've heard the high street, the new high street, described as theatre, you know, a place to see and be seen, a place to perform or watch performance. So yeah, that's what we're hoping to achieve in Borden Town Centre.
Brilliant. So has anybody got any more questions? No. It's been so great to hear, you know, from the government's perspective and equally to hear from our small businesses what they are experiencing. I'm very encouraged to hear that David's got a successful tender, and it's also it's probably good feedback for you, Martin, to hear that the process was certainly made a little easier. So I really want to thank you, Martin, for your time coming along today and talking to us. It's been really, really useful. What is the best way for people to keep up to date and keep in contact with you and follow what you're doing and gain knowledge?
Well, I was going to say probably the best way is to follow me on LinkedIn.
Okay. Because
I do post out very regularly what all the business related announcements are from government. So follow me on that by all means.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, I would suggest everybody does that just to keep up to date. It's really good. Without any
information in the, should I just say there's lots of information in the chat, and Lou's posted lots of links, and Martin, I don't know if you can see the chat, but lots of people who had to dash off slightly before the end have said thank you very much for a very interesting talk. And they're sorry they had to leave early, but they've had to move on to do pressing business. And so if everybody could save the chat, and then you'll have all of the links that we've talked about and access to Martin and his LinkedIn and everything else.
Brilliant.
Sorry, Lou, back to you.
No, that's fine. So without any further ado, I'd like to wish you all a good weekend. Don't forget that next week we also have a really good talk coming up. As I mentioned earlier, it's Joanna, and she's coming to talk to us all about employment and HR and how to retain people, because people matter. We will see you all next week, and once again, many thanks. David, it was lovely to meet you. I'll be in contact. Maybe we can talk to you a bit more about what we do at the hub and see if we've got any synergy there. That would be great. I've got your email details, so I'll do that. And Marika was here, but she's gone. I think she had to leave, so I will contact her as well. Again, thank you very much, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin.
Thanks,
Everybody have a great weekend. Bye now.
Bye.